I was living in Australia writing television commercials when I was approached by a small film production company who asked me if I'd like to go to Fiji and write and partly direct a documentary about what was going on in Fiji. Well, I didn't want to at first. It didn't seem very attractive, but eventually the fee went up to where it was attractive. So I went and travelled around and saw most of what was going on the island. We were there about 6 weeks, I suppose. And I liked it very much. By the time I left, I really fancied living there. So when I got back to Australia, I persuaded my then wife and 2 little children to pack up and come over to Fiji and live with me there. And I stayed there for 12 years. And I was there before the country got independence and afterwards. And a lot of people think, and the world's media, particularly the press, are, what I think is to blame, in always stressing any disagreement between Fijians and Indians, and seem to blame everything on Indians. In fact, there was always tension between one Fijian clan and another. And there'd been tension since, before the English or anybody was there. In fact, one old Fijian chief had a brilliant idea, and he sent one of his people over to America and said, "We offer our country to America." Because he said, once the Americans take over, they'll provide plenty of money and all that. But the Americans said, "Oh no, thanks, we don't want Fiji." So when he got back and told the chief said, "Oh dear, I know, we'll offer it to England." So they sent a messenger over to Queen Victoria, who was busy building her empire and being very proud of it. And she said, "Oh yes, I'd like to own Fiji." So that's how Fiji became part of the British Empire. But eventually England was unloading its commitments around the world, or the British were rather, and they gave Fiji its independence. And not immediately, but in a few years, the Fijian clans surfaced again and started fighting against each other. First of all, just arguing, and then it turned into physical violence. And then it turned into different Fijian clans taking over the government by force. Well, when I got back to Australia, I thought, I've got to write about all this. There's a novel in there somewhere. And I started off with a European protagonist, and a Fijian, and an Indian, and started to work them up through the background I'd known and the interaction I'd seen there. And because the European, even though he was living there and in quite an important position, he thought he knew Fiji, but he didn't. So I called this novel Lost on the Island, because that's what the European, the white man, was. He was lost because he couldn't understand what was behind Fijian, what was behind Indians. And I felt, having lived there for a while, I had got a hang of this. I had a lot of Fijian friends and a lot of Indian friends, as well as Europeans. And so I really felt, in writing this novel, that I was getting this stuff out of me. All that I'd consumed by osmosis, things that had sunk into me, when I began to write, they all started coming out.